I'm sorry, core contributors, it's not possible to know how many miners support a miner-activated soft fork any more than it's possible to know how many nodes support a user-activated soft fork. And pretending that you can is disingenuous. It's a convenient lie that is used to, in my opinion, subvert node sovereignty. Nodes should be always arbitrarily choosing their consensus and the ones certainly activating it as well. And core likes to pretend that, we'll change all kinds of things, but when it comes to consensus stuff, we really leave that in the hands of the user. But that's just not true. I'm not saying that you have to verify every piece of software you've ever run in your life. I'm saying, please, God, verify your money. Please, please, please. Just your money. That's it. That's the most important thing. Like, at least if you have money that to you would hurt to lose, please verify it. Please participate in it, just for your sake.
Hi, Gnome. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Everything is fantastic. I really appreciate you having me, Robin.
Absolutely. And I think we already had, how you said, pre-game, a lot of interesting thoughts. So I'm really looking forward to this one, especially because we're talking about an issue where I'm not sure how big of an issue it is for long-term for Bitcoin survival, but I'm sure a lot of people actually care about that issue a lot. It's the core versus nots debate. And before we get into all the topics, maybe just briefly give us an overview of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
So I'm MrRGnome. I've been in Bitcoin for well over a decade at this point. I'm one of these, all-in degens that lives on Bitcoin. It's my native and primary currency. My background is as a software developer, though I haven't done a ton of software development for Bitcoin, mostly just side projects here and there, the odd wallet, the odd, tip bot, that kind of thing. I run a lot of communities as an educator, including bitcoindiscord.com, btcmaxies.com, which is an education resource site we forked from Lop. Thanks, Lop. As well as our Bitcoin CA. I used to moderate our Bitcoin as well, but due to personal differences with the moderators there in terms of shitcoin policy, they weren't very happy to continue having me.
It's super interesting because going all in Bitcoin, and I fully also went in all in Bitcoin. Most of my income is actually denominated now in Bitcoin directly on chain. And even some of my expenses are growing to be more and more in Bitcoin. And it's so rare. It's like we're such a small group of people that actually went down the line and denominate their wealth, and in my case also earnings and expenses more and more into just Bitcoin. And when I encounter normal people say like, "Oh, you are in cryptocurrencies, right?" And I'm like, "No, I'm in Bitcoin." And then it's like, "Oh, but you must have some stocks, like some other things." I'm like, "No, it's just me and my Bitcoin." That's all I have.
Invest in what you know, says Warren Buffett.
Exactly. Now, before we get started with like what side and all of this, maybe you can give us a brief overview of what is the core versus nots issue? Like what is discussed?
In my view, what's their issue?
Oh yes, like what's in your view the issue? Why does nots now come on the scene? It's been around for a longer time, but why is it so popular, do you think, now? And what is basically the debate about?
Well, I think that there is a fundamental issue across the whole ecosystem right now. And that issue is simply that nobody's verifying anything. A lot of people are running their mouths, not a lot of people actually going out there, experimenting with code, comparing nodes and implementations. Nobody's really verifying anything. As for this current explosion in knots growth, which I want to add has been significantly overstated by some sites like CoinDance, for example. They're saying like 20% knots adoption. As far as I know, it's closer to 14. But that's still a pretty enormous percentage versus the less than 1% that it had a year ago. And it has been around forever. I mean, Luke Jr. has been a bit of a punching bag in the Bitcoin community for a long time for his views on any number of the personal things in his life, from how he schools his kids to stuff like tonal Bitcoin and we all like to have a little bit of a laugh about it, but the reality is he's got quite a competent node implementation. And as such, it has kind of become the first landing spot for core detractors or people who have a problem with some of these decisions, policy decisions that have been made in core. And I count myself among those people, though I pretty strongly disagree with a lot of things coming out of the Knots camp. And I have several gripes about the social space of Knots and the kind of misinformation that pervades it.
It's interesting. Is there, before we even start like talking about the differences, should the average Bitcoiner care about that issue? And if so, why?
Well, I think that let's talk about what the average Bitcoiner is. Is the average Bitcoiner somebody holding some paper Bitcoin or an ETF? I say no. I say that's not a Bitcoiner at all. I think that objectively, to be a Bitcoiner, you must participate in Bitcoin. The most minimum way to do that is holding your keys, but obviously participating in the protocol is an ironclad definition of a Bitcoiner. You're actively using and defining Bitcoin. So is a choice of what node software important to the average Bitcoiner? It should be the only thing that's important to the average Bitcoiner. It is the source of our decentralized properties. You making an informed decision about what the node code you want to run is and how that node defines what Bitcoin even is. It is, I can't think of anything more important than choosing your node.
It's so interesting, but at the same time, you don't see, like there's those, and you just mentioned it, there's like the full scope of people that maybe call themselves Bitcoiner or are called in statistics Bitcoiner, which include people that have, I don't know, a $500 on Coinbase sitting in Bitcoin, which I agree with you here is like, oh, that's not Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's an IOU. That's a gift card at best.
I love gift card actually. I always say IOU, but I love gift card. It's like you might have Bitcoin in the future if they choose to give it to you. That's kind of the promise there. But most people still have it on an exchange or on an ETF or on a third party thing. So if we exclude all the Bitcoiners that just have like self-custody or like have mostly on self-custody, then we have a way smaller subset of people. But then even more drastically, I think, is what of those people that have self-custody also run their own node? And also, I'm not fully sure, like what you said, like, do you say that only people that do self-custody and running their own node, so also broadcasting transactions just with their own node, is this also a Bitcoiner, or is someone that holds keys but doesn't participate in the node network also a Bitcoiner?
Well, I think that you have to acknowledge that even if you aren't running a node, if you have keys, if you're signing, you are implementing, or not implementing, you're using implemented details of the Bitcoin protocol. You are in some manner participating in the Bitcoin protocol, even if it's not the safest manner, even if it's a trusting manner. You are doing things that the Bitcoin protocol describes, and you are thus participating. So holding your keys, I think, is that minimum bar. But I think that the bar we should all be looking to treat as the minimum, and certainly the bar I treat as the minimum as an educator, is running a node. I educate node first. Let's talk about wallets. Let's get on a testnet node. Let's experiment with stuff. But like, I want Bitcoiners to be comfortable running a node.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And I love the node first principle, because usually people are coming in, they have it on, I don't know, Coinbase, Kraken, or whatever, shitcoin casino, and buy their Bitcoin. And then they slowly like, oh, I should have self-custody. And then down the line, somewhere like, oh, what is a node? And it's super funny. I asked the question of my YouTube community, like, oh, where are you? Like, do you run core? Do you run nodes? Like, where do you stand on the debate? And people were asking me like, what's a Bitcoin node? And I'm like, oh hell, I have to cover that more. It's like I did something wrong in my educational journey here on my YouTube channel.
I think that it's not even you. It's just our whole community. Such a primary motivation of participating in Bitcoin for so many is greed. Like, it's an incentive-based system, and a lot of people adopt it because they think that it's going to make them fiat. Right? They're very They're fiat minded. That's why they buy things like the ETF. They want more dollars. They don't want more Bitcoin. They don't want to touch Bitcoin. And they're sold even the lie that it's hard to touch Bitcoin. So don't worry about it. Let me hold all your Bitcoin for you. I'm a benevolent company. You can trust me. But that's not Bitcoin. It's just a marketing pitch. And these people don't quite understand what Bitcoin even is yet, which is why they don't know what a node is. So yeah, I think that everybody needs to start talking about nodes and making user choice. And even though like I've become quite pro knots for reasons I'm sure that we'll be discussing in this podcast, it's really about the user choice. Like users need, I'm giving them the option of any node software out there, be it Core, Knots, BTCD. I'm maybe listing Knots first, but like they need to decide for themselves. They can't take it on some influencer's word what to do. They can't take it on some developer's word what to do. There's a degree of self-responsibility that you cannot get around in the Bitcoin ecosystem. You have to take responsibility for the code that you choose to run, or we lose our decentralized properties, because that is the source of them, choosing the code we run and defining Bitcoin arbitrarily for ourselves.
Do you think this could be in any way, shape, or form be a threat to Bitcoin? Do have something like such a narrative, emotionally driven debate?
I think that we're a tribal species by default, and I think that we see those tribes form in all of our social interactions, including in things like this Knots versus Core debate. I'm sure that, in fact, I know for a fact there are many actors in each camp that would describe the other as attackers, but they really aren't. And in the instances in which you could maybe perceive an attack, it isn't in bad faith. I honestly believe that everybody in the Core camp is acting on good faith and trying to do what they think is best. I honestly think that everybody in the Knots camp is acting on good faith and doing what they trying to do what they think is best. I think that their priorities in each instances are often wrong and sometimes even incongruent with Bitcoin itself.
Is that the what was your main reason to get into Knots? Or were you always maybe it's also interesting, did you had a moment where you switched to Knots in the recent history, and
Yes.
especially why did you then switch to Knots?
So I switched to Knots. I've noticed over the decade plus that I've been involved in Bitcoin a pretty consistent pattern with core devs. They value things like state safety above everything else. That's why they push miner activated soft forks instead of user activated soft forks, despite nodes inherently holding that power in this ecosystem. And I think that that's wrong, because as we saw in the block size wars, miners are just as easily able to lie about what code they're running as you can spin up a node and pretend like you support a UASF. There's no actual reliable way to tell how much support a fork has, no matter how you activate it. And the core developers, for sake of convenience, like to lie to themselves that there is. They like to say, well, if we can get all the miners on board with something, we know we have a degree of state security. We know we're not going to be getting reorgs. We know we're not going to be putting this incredibly valuable ecosystem through the economic ringer as forks are happening and reorgs are happening and double spends are happening. We want it to be as safe as possible. And that's a really good goal. But I'm sorry, core contributors, it's not possible to know how many miners support a miner-activated soft fork any more than it's possible to know how many nodes support a user-activated soft fork. And pretending that you can is disingenuous. It's a convenient lie that is used to, in my opinion, subvert node sovereignty. Nodes should be always arbitrarily choosing their consensus, and the ones certainly activating it as well. And there's actually, I think, significant harm that can come about by delegating that to miners. And we saw that harm precipitate in the block size wars, where they blocked things, where they tried to propose forks that would increase node user resources, make it more difficult to run a node. They have a lot of incentive to dump their debt, their tech debt on us, these companies. So that was, I think, the first coming to this observation that they were never really going to allow an activation methodology across the network that put user sovereignty first. That was the first kind of thing that annoyed me about core. And then when we get to, more recent examples of this, like the lot true debate, I had a real big problem with the way the lot true debate went down. Lot true, if you're not familiar, was the Taproot activation debate. And we were arguing about how do we want Taproot to activate? Do we want it to be a miner activated soft fork? Do we want it to be a user activated flag day? Or what do we want to do here? And it was proposed that we should let nodes decide. We should give them a configuration option called lot. And if they set lot to true, then it would opt them into the flag day. But for the reasons that I've just described, Core's like, no. We can't do that. That's not safe. What if they fork without the miners and we give them, any user, the ability to arbitrarily config things? They're gonna fuck gun themselves. This is one of their favorite words. They're gonna fuck gun themselves if we let them choose how they activate their consensus changes. And Core likes to pretend that, we'll change all kinds of things, but when it comes to consensus stuff, we really leave that in the hands of the user. But that's just not true. They were against the UASF and the block size wars. They proposed speedy trial for Taproot, and they refused to allow configurations like lot true. So there is a consistent pattern here of them, even on consensus issues, denying users and nodes their voice. And the core of the problem I have with Core is that they don't give node runners a voice. When you have a protocol that's uniquely defined by its users, where its most valuable property is its decentralization, when you as a developer take away those user choices for any reason, even if it's good engineering reasons, even if it's good, network topology reasons, you're actually diminishing the decentralized properties of the network. And seeing as that's the most valuable thing we have, I have a huge problem with that. So don't like the way that Core talks around forks. I don't like the security policy of Core. I don't like that sometimes they let security issues go undisclosed for many years. And then when they do disclose it, I'm reading the disclosure and I'm like, this can be mitigated simply by changing my config or restarting my node. And if they would have told me about this in a more reasonable time frame, I could have protected myself. And instead of allowing me to do that, what they do is they use fear and intimidation to try and manipulate me into running a different set of code. And again, not allowing an informed node runner to make that informed choice of like, this is the code I want to run. This is the security patch content in this code. This is the vulnerability in this other code. Being unable to make that informed decision and instead using fear to try and manipulate me into running code is, in my opinion, completely antithetical to Bitcoin itself. So I have a huge problem with that as well. And then there's the mempool options, things like, do I want to be able to filter some of these inscriptions from my mempool or from my broadcast? Like, I think that that's a great thing. Maybe it does reduce my ability to accurately estimate fees, but how do you know my use cases? I should get to decide what my node's resources are consuming. I should get to decide how my node is configured. I mean, you let me run a node with no mempool at all, and what does that do to my fees? Estimation, at least as through the mempool as opposed to block history. Like, the idea that I shouldn't be able to choose what's in my mempool makes me crazy. So I have a problem with there too. And all these problems for me just kind of accumulated over time, over the decade plus that I've been involved, until eventually I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to explore other implementations. This isn't what I want.
So was op return then the latest one that kind of made you switch?
I was already switched by the time the op return thing happened.
But it seemed to be the one that kind of made things emotional and made things popular. Like at least this was the first one where this was where nods really came on my radar with this op return, where Guest all of a sudden brought it up, where I considered like, okay, should I switch? Should I consider it more like this seems to be for most people where like, okay, like we should care all of a sudden, like what implementation, and before most people were just running core.
On the scale of the issues that I just described, consensus issues, security issues, governance issues of our reference implementation, op return is such a nothing burger by comparison. Op return, like, you mentioned how the emotional argument, we're against shitcoins, which I am. I'm about as the most anti-shitcoin person I know, has galvanized people in a way that maybe they previously weren't really paying attention to some of these things. But because they've now that they're paying attention, maybe they would have some more issues with stuff like lot true or with the security policy. I have a problem with the emotionally charged nature of this argument and some of the misinformation around it. Like, for example, we could always have large op returns. This isn't a new thing. Filters have never worked to stop anything from getting on chain. Certainly there's no more compelling argument that filters have never stopped anything from on chain than looking at, the sub 1 sat per vbyte fees. Every node in the world, except for miners, seems to filter 1 sat per vbyte fees. You can't imagine a filter policy more exclusive, except for possibly the non-standard filter policy that we previously had. And in both instances, you see those transactions, in the case of sub 1 sat per vbyte fees in bulk, getting on chain from every miner. If filters worked, we wouldn't see sub 1 sat per vbyte transactions. Filters don't do anything to incur a cost to spam at all. And so this is an example of one of the many emotional arguments and that are just fundamentally misinformed that I hear on the NOTS side all the time. And there's quite a few of those. They range from filters stop spam to if we change op return, we're going to have nefarious content like CP on chain. And I can look at the Bitcoin PRs. I can read GitHub. I can see that we XOR the blocks directory. I know BIP 324. I can see that we can encrypt relay. You can't tell me that, oh no, if we allow Core v30, suddenly the whole network's going to explode and everybody's going to be automatically detected by their virus detectors and their nodes shut down. That's just not how Bitcoin works. So there's so much misinformation on the NOTS side. It's very frustrating. And there's a whole bunch of conspiracy theories too, Core is bought off and paid for, Core is, corrupt and all these things. They're not corrupt. They're engineers doing, frankly, an amazing engineering job from the context of traditional software development. Where they've faltered, in my opinion, is failing to acknowledge this isn't traditional software development. The efficiency of the network comes second to the decentralization of the network. And by refusing to allow nodes a voice in the direction of the reference implementation, not dissimilar to the way a product owner has a voice in traditional software development, they've footgunned themselves, and that's why NOTS adoption has exploded.
Yeah, I see a lot of the most emotionally charged arguments in my YouTube comments, sometimes even when it's not even discussed on the podcast. Even then, and sometimes wonder if it's a bot or if they just want to make that topic a topic, even if it's not a topic on the podcast, where people say oh, if you run Core v30 and you're basically relaying CP, you will become a criminal just by running a node. And I'm like what is this argument? That does not make any sense for me. All of a sudden, I'm a criminal just because I run a Bitcoin software implementation. I don't know. I don't get that argument, and it's just very, very emotionally charged. And I've heard that argument multiple times from many different, very popular voices, even.
Absolutely. And that's where it's coming from. It's coming from influencers like Mechanic. It's coming from influencers like Crater, and it's grossly technically misinformed. You can verify, just as I did, that we XOR the blocks directory, the .dat files in the blocks directory. We do. You can verify how V2 relay works and how it's encrypted transport. The misinformation coming out of these camps is, in my mind, unforgivable. I had this utopic vision of what Bitcoin was over a decade ago. I had this idea that, it's going to be beautiful. It's transparent. We're going to get rid of all of this misinformation because anybody could just verify. There's going to be no more of these fights or debates, and it's going to be beautiful because we'll just go, anytime there's a disagreement, we'll just go read the code and we'll view experientially what's happening with our nodes on the network. And that couldn't be further from the freaking truth. And I'm so disappointed. I've really had I'm disillusioned about people's ability to verify because so many of these things shouldn't even be a topic. But you're right. These are the things that have seemingly captured the user base's attention for whatever reason, be they, emotionally charged, or they're just less technical, so they're simpler to grok. But this is what people care about.
It's because you laid it out perfectly, and then there's bigger issues actually, as the operator previously on, where like I wonder a lot, like why is it now? I mean, obviously now like the V30 is soon coming, so like maybe it's just the timing of it, but it is like, why is it now so popular? And I haven't figured out a good answer. Like why is it now that people all of a sudden pay attention to this topic?
The only answer that I can come to myself is because of these specifically emotionally charged arguments. When you're arguing about things like lot true, like people are like, what the hell's lot? Like, what are you even talking about? Getting them to sit down and have that conversation is its own struggle. There's like a learning curve on the argument. Whereas the learning curve on child pornography is bad, there's no learning curve there. That's just like, oh yeah, I agree with that. It is bad. Like we should stop. I don't want anything to do with that. It's so simple and accessible. And I think even though deeply misinformed, filters stop spam, they stop this CP, they stop whatever. It's misinformed, but it catches people's attention in a way that these more complex and nuanced realities don't. And I actually think that a lot of the people pushing these things know better. I think that a lot of the people saying this misinformation in the Knots camp know better. They know how to verify. They're developers. They know that the things that they're saying aren't true. And I think that for many of them, the ends justify the means. And I know there are people in both camps that think this. More Knots adoption is worth misinforming some people and getting them all riled up, even if it's on a false pretense. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, because I think it's very dangerous to have easily manipulated node runners. Those are not sovereign informed node runners. That's how we get the block size wars. That's how we get another B cache. I'm very concerned about that kind of thing. I want informed sovereign node runners, not ones listening to influencers that are making emotional arguments and verifying absolutely nothing.
Is the core it's so bad because core arguments is like, is it the core argument or is it the core argument? Is the main difference between core and Knots from a philosophical standpoint that they're kind of saying, oh, we want to have less option for the node runners and we want to kind of protect them from making mistakes?
It's paternal. The core developers are paternalistic, as are pretty much all traditional software developers, and for good reason. I don't need to tell you, you're a software developer. Users are pretty darn stupid. They are very keen to shoot themselves in the foot. They love it. Trying to teach them anything at all is like trying to teach a pet rock to do tricks. It's a struggle, and it doesn't work. And I think that they're applying the best practices in traditional software development. Everything that I have a problem with is actually them doing everything they've been taught for their entire professional careers to do. But Bitcoin demands new standards. It demands a different set of best practices that we actually have to develop ourselves and think about ourselves. And I don't believe that the core devs are able to extract themselves from that paradigm that they've been indoctrinated in.
It's interesting. And then Knots is kind of the opposite, where you have way more options, way more more adjustability.
In Knots, if you want to mess up your fee estimation all day, you can do that. Even to the point where you want to change the definition of vbyte, go ahead. You can change the definition of vbyte. Your fee estimates are going to be all over the place, but you can change the definition of vbyte. And if not to, completely segue into a different topic, but like, for example, I think that that's one of the things that should have been done here. I think that we should be trying to petition miners to change their definition of vbyte to get rid of the SegWit discount. So many of the core arguments revolve around, we need to stop, companies like Citria from pushing their shitcoins onto inscriptions. We need to stop the bloating of the UTXO set. And those are all true things. We do need to stop those things. But when the answer to that is, well, we'll just expand op return to be effectively limitless, that doesn't actually address the fact that the incentives are still to use that SegWit discount. And, as to the whack-a-mole argument, they're also absolutely right. If you start trying to like stop individual ways of doing spam, like you're just going to encourage them to obfuscate it in different ways. And so long as there's discounted block space in which to obfuscate, they will. So how do you solve that? You get rid of the discounted block space. Suddenly, there's no more discounted holes to hide in. You only are playing whack-a-mole in full paying block space, and then the incentives align where scammers should be using op return, because they're paying full price as they would in any of the other block space, and we can make it easier for them, like say expanding the op return default limits. Because you could do this already, like I really have no problem with making it easier to make large op return transactions. But the incentives of, we want people to use op return for their garbage. Like if op return is the toilet, we need to convince people to sit on it first. And right now they're not. They're just flinging shit all over our ecosystem. We need to remove the incentives to do that before changing any op return settings is going to have impact on anything. And we see that. It's not like we changed op return settings and then, suddenly there's no more spam on chain.
Is this whole thing maybe a good thing for Bitcoin because it makes it makes a lot of people aware that there is, first of all, more than one implementation that they can run. I think a lot of people kind of got to learn this lesson, and it also promotes running your own node.
I think that that's to the merit of the argument that the ends justify the means. It's okay that we're misinforming people. It's okay that, we're relying on these emotionally charged arguments because it is creating these greater goods you're talking about, where more people are running nodes, where more people are aware and thinking about the node software that they're running, even if it is in the framing of whatever some influencer told them. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that the value of a node runner who is doing simply what they told because they've been emotionally manipulated into doing it is of the same value to the network or that individual as them being informed and making some educated decisions for themselves.
That's a really good point of having like more, and I never heard that actually, because always like, like more node runners is good, but you also have, you should not count how many nodes they're running. You should count how many nodes are running that have a critical voice in the sphere, and not just do what someone else tells them to do. Like that in itself has no it has value, of course, which is still a running node with a voice, but it's probably not of the same value as someone that thinks for themselves critical if this is a implementation they want to support, if there's a version, an upgrade they want to support, or how they want to see Bitcoin in the future. That's a really, I've never heard that argument.
Yeah, I think that in our broader community, there is a corporately influenced narrative that any node is a good node. Get Start9, get Umbrel, and I strongly reject that message. Any node isn't a good node. The node that you control and actively choose is a good node. If you can't change your node implementation, it is not your node. If you don't have the ability to arbitrarily decide what Bitcoin is or have a voice in consensus changes when they occur, if the next block size war is tomorrow and you can't participate, it's not your node. If the next BTCD freeze up from 999 multisigs happens tomorrow and strands all your lightning channels in the LND and you can't apply a patch or change node software, it's not your node. If you're relying on a permissioned store for what node you're going to choose, that's not your node. So I have a huge problem with these like node in a box solutions that everybody pushes. And a lot of people take sponsorship from them. And that motivates them to push them. And a lot of people make the argument that, well, any node is good enough. And no, you have to have some influence over your node in order for it to be good enough.
It's a very good argument. It's also, now that we're talking about the monetary incentives, I think we only talked about that before we actually started recording, is the monetary incentives on both sides, because I sometimes wonder, there are people that argue a lot on those issues. They spend a lot of time arguing on that issue. I spend barely no time on that issue. Maybe I should spend more time on that issue. But I see and I'm always asking myself, okay, why does someone argue so long and so excessively on one side? What is the incentive and the motivation behind that? And before we talked about Lob, because he was the first person, and until you, the only person actually where we only talked about the core versus nuts debate. It was previously discussed on the podcast, but not like more as a side topic and not as the main topic. And then you brought up that he has this, how's it called? Citra, the company.
Yeah, Citria. I think, I don't know. I don't know the pronunciation, but it's a shitcoin stack on top of Bitcoin, and basically they threatened to spam inscriptions instead of op returns, which is bad for the network. It's bad for me as a node runner. It's bad for you as a node runner because it bloats the UTXO set. And we don't want that. That's why we have op return. It's like a catch-all for transactions that we don't necessarily want, like arbitrary data, but which we want to prevent the harm that they can cause us. And so the core devs, I think very rightly, would rather have people using op return than spamming the chain with dust UTXOs. And so they're trying to incentivize people to use it. Peter Todd was on behalf of Citria. He is the one that pushed this op return change to core and the main repo there. And actors like Lop, a lot of influencers in this space, they've got their hands in Citria's pockets. They've got some ownership there. So there is some motivation from many of these shitcoiny actors to have pushed for some of these changes, even though, as I was describing previously, they don't actually change the incentives for which of these arbitrary data methodologies you would use.
Are those monetary incentives on both sides, also on the not side, on like, I think Luke and...
Well, Luke is paid by Ocean. And I don't honestly think Luke needs any monetary incentives to dislike core or have something in his craw about it. He's been fighting them for longer than, I'm sure either of us have even known about Bitcoin. He has all kinds of problems with the way core has treated him, and I think for pretty good reason. It's on the subject of how core treats other developers. I find it so interesting how they want to be so selective about whose voices are allowed in a debate. First, you can't have node runners. Node runners' voices aren't allowed in a discussion. That's just, they're not engineers. They're not welcome. They just get in the way and they're trolls. And then you also can't have contributors that are allowed in the discussion either, unless they're recent frequent contributors as arbitrarily defined by whatever the discussion is currently happening. So, for example, Luke doesn't qualify apparently as a recent and frequent contributor, despite having, I think, something like the 13th most merged PRs and twice as many unmerged PRs. And of course, them being quite recent. They like to make rules arbitrarily and on the fly as to limit discussion in the direction that they want. And then they pretend like it's styled after the IEEE. And I have a problem with that. That's a broken governance model. That isn't the way a decentralized, node-defined reference implementation should function.
And I've seen that. And censoring debate is for me always a major red flag. If someone is trying to control who can speak and contribute, like, that's not something I want to see in Bitcoin at all.
Well, see, now I might have to disagree with you there because, I'm somewhat of a controlling person in my communities. I think that there are different spaces that need to have different purposes. And if we're talking specifically about the development of the reference implementation, I think it needs to be quite open. But if we're talking about an arbitrary social space, especially an educating one, I think it's very functionally useful to silence the voices of, for example, shitcoiners. I simply don't tolerate shitcoins in my community. Shitcoiners are fine, but if you come in here and you start trying to convince me that Doge is the next coming of Christ because Elon said so, I'm sorry, you're getting a mute. I run my communities with something of an iron fist, quite controversially. But I think that you almost need a benevolent dictator in some of these models in order to create a space where you can have signal. Otherwise, it's just noise. So I'm pretty in favor of strong moderation, if I'm being honest.
I do love the watches from Coin Vigilante, but today I have a very special message, not from me, but from the CEO himself, Carlos from Coin Vigilante. Let's hear him.
To all the Robin Seyr podcast community, I'm Carlos Estrada from Coin Vigilante, and we're sponsors of the show, and we're going to give you a very special discount exclusive to you. 10% off your order at coinvigilante.com when you use Robin at checkout. We have really nice watches that you guys can buy right now for 10%. This is a transparency edition, beautiful watch. These watches are worn in over 55 countries and counting. This discount is just for you, exclusive to the Robin Seyr podcast. We have limited editions, we have limited productions. These watches come in very nice packaging, boxing material, and they are collector's item for Bitcoiners only. Enjoy the discount. Thanks for supporting the show and Coin Vigilante.
I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They're also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I mean, to a certain extent, I do the same thing because I only have Bitcoiners then there's the question of like, who's a Bitcoiner? Because having someone like James on who has invested interest in those things, someone might argue is like, oh, he's not a proper Bitcoiner. But yeah, it's interesting because like then it's an arbitrary line that I see as like he's a Bitcoiner and he's not. Like I don't like someone that pushes Ethereum or like any other coin for that matter on my show. That like, oh no. And I had those unfortunately already where someone started pushing, what was it? I don't know. It was some coin. It was not even a popular coin, and he started pushing it on the show. And I was like, "Oh, super sorry. I cannot air that." Like, it was a nice conversation, but like this is unfortunately not for my audience, and I cannot post this. And so yeah, like content moderation is probably done by everyone that has. And I mean, like it's anyways it's a free space that everyone can contribute, where I contribute, like podcasting and YouTube and Twitter and Rumble. Like I don't control anything there. I can only control what I bring to the table. And I think you run a Discord channel, like that's a whole nother game. Like that's like you have to basically fulfill the purpose that you are promoting. Like you're promoting a Bitcoin only space, having someone that pushes shitcoins in there. You're basically fulfilling the purpose of the group with moderating. Like, and that's for me. Like I think there's a difference between moderation and censorship.
I agree. There is a difference between moderation and censorship. And so the group that I moderate on Discord is bitcoindiscord.com. And I moderate with a number of other, really involved people. Being a janitor is hard work across these social spaces. Educating at the same time is more work. In regards to LOP, I don't think that we need to be so tribal as to completely disregard people when they do things we don't like. I think that there's a lot of LOP content that I still link to and I use, like, for example, his metal storage stress tests. I think those are really useful for Bitcoiners investigating, how do I store my key backup in a safe and secure way? He does yearly reviews of node sync times and things that I think are also really useful. But for example, I have enough problems with the content on his website that our community, our Discord community, we forked it and we took all the shitcoin stuff out of it and converted it into btcmaxies.com, where we promote knots first, as well as, a lot of other educational content. We're transforming that resource from something that shills CASA and something that shills the things he's invested in to one that is just a strictly Bitcoin maximalist resource. So I think that you can take the good and ignore the bad. And then, when LOP comes up with some great ideas about op return because he's motivated by his investments, you get to say, oh, LOP, you're just being stupid today. That's fine. Go back to testing the speed of nodes. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
I love the idea of learning from everyone the best things and kind of focusing on the commonalities. I think this is also something that I hate in those debates where two people that are basically fighting on the same side, just fighting for Bitcoin and for a more sovereign world, all of a sudden fighting against each other and are at its throat. I was like, focus on the things that you have in common, and maybe you find a valuable argument there, and maybe one or the other actually learns something. Contrast to just like killing each other with emotional debates.
I'm of the belief there is far more that unites us than divides us, and I actually think that Bitcoin is a really good evidence of that. It's split pretty evenly across the political divide, no matter where you are in the world. You look at the polling, for example, in America, and 51% of Bitcoin users are Democrats, 49% are Republicans. You look at the stats in Canada, where I'm from, it's the same. You look at the stats in Europe, it's generally the same. Bitcoin is for anyone. Maybe not everyone, but it's for anyone that chooses to take self-responsibility and use it. It's not limited to a single libertarian ideology. Everybody has use of sound money. Everybody has use of decentralized state machines. Everybody has use of trust mitigation. And to me, that's what Bitcoin is. It's a trust machine. I don't have to trust you as much as I used to in the old system, Robin. And I think that that's beautiful. And everybody wants that.
I have an interesting question for you. Hopefully it's interesting. You chose Knots because of a series of events that kind of happened to Core. If all those serious events were not there, and you just say like, okay, Core was perfect as it is, and you strip the whole debate down to the op return thing that people are like so obsessed about, and Knots is basically the same thing as Core, just with the op return limit that you can set it yourself. Would you then also choose Knots? Do you think this filter makes so much sense for you to switch to a different implementation?
No, probably not. If the core governance problems didn't exist and all that existed around this issue was the op return discussion, I would be very turned off by the narrative that, we're stopping spam with these filters. I would be saying things like, we could always make op returns that were this large. Like, what are you talking about? What's the problem? I would probably have a bigger problem. My problem with the op return debate is the fact that we're exploding the op return filter size, but that doesn't actually incentivize anybody to use it versus inscriptions. I think that it is irresponsible to do that without first closing that inscriptions discounted loophole for storing data, because otherwise the incentives are broken. And we don't need a fork to fix that. Any node can arbitrarily define what V bytes are. The only nodes that matter, though, are the miners in that discussion. If we can convince miners to change their definition of V byte, we can, without a fork, get rid of the SegWit discount, and we can stop these inscriptions. And I think that that's what we should do.
What I heard a lot from people that are discussing if they should run knots, and I only bring it up because I think it will probably come up in the comment section. I want to address it. Is people saying, "Oh, but knots is just run by Luke,"
and a lie.
Yeah, and can you explain like what's the history of knots and like why it's not just one person that they are all of a sudden dependent on?
Well, this argument is rooted in the history of knots. People claim that knots is only Luke because for a while it was only Luke. But obviously it's not only Luke in the sense that it's downstream from core. So all of the people contributing on core are implicitly contributing on knots. The argument is that Luke acting on his own and making these merges by himself and creating the, 6% difference in code bases, I believe it is has the potential to inject code that could be malicious or any of these other things. And I say to those people, aren't you reviewing the code that you run? What's wrong with you? You're a developer. You understand Bitcoin. Aren't you reading it? And that should be the end of the argument, but it's also just a false argument. I moderate the Knots Discord now. Don't ask me why. I tend to get in a lot of fights there. But like the amount of development that's going on there is pretty high. There's quite a large number of people actively involved in building Knots at this point in time. And that has probably been buoyed by this op return argument that's happening. Anybody can look on GitHub though and categorically say it's false that nobody is building Knots. And if your argument is that nobody's reviewing Luke's PRs, my question to you is, well, why the hell aren't you? If you run Knots, you should. I do. I review Luke's PRs, so I can say at least one person does, but I know many others do. And aren't you reviewing your diffs? Like you can't just blindly trust developers. That's not how Bitcoin works. You're a developer. Blindly trust you, Robin.
Never trust your developers. They're always doing shit. I was in my previous company. I was 3-4 years developer, front end and back end. And so like I started, like, I don't know, like you probably don't care, but like I started as a software tester, then so like just trying to break the software that we were producing, which was a very fun job, but it was boring after a while for me. And then I was a software developer, and then I went more into the client side. With client side, I mean talking with customers and talking with clients and kind of seeing the implementation, how it's done. And on all of those occasions, like I made the whole part through the company. So I tested the software that the software team was doing. I was in the software team, and I sold the software that the software team was doing. And it's really interesting how you have the different roles in these companies. And one thing is 100% certain: the user will find bugs that you would have never found because you would have never came to the idea to use this piece of software in that sense, and that everyone can make mistakes. So never trust anyone, even though he might be the CTO or the most senior developer. he can make a mistake. So if you run software and you rely on that software, you better verify it. And that's, I think, a major learning that I had in my small career in software development.
I think a lot of people that aren't in software don't realize what you're saying, in that they treat, they're very used to appeals to authority. It's kind of how our society runs. We delegate trust, and they've chosen to delegate trust in software to you, the developer. And they don't maybe necessarily realize that that's not always appropriate. We should pick and choose our moments of trust. I'm not saying that you have to verify every piece of software you've ever run in your life. I'm saying, please, God, verify your money. Please, please, please. Just your money. That's it. That's the most important thing. Like, at least if you have money that to you would hurt to lose, please verify it. Please participate in it, just for your sake. But my sake too, because the more that people independently do this, the stronger we are together. The valuable properties of this network are emergent. They are part of the network topology collectively acting in their own self-interest individually. And together we find that self-interest is actually fairly unified. We all just want to protect our money and be private and left alone to do our business. And obviously we also don't want to be, enabling scams. I don't think that the core developers want to enable scams. I don't think that they want to enable CP, and they're not, right? Like, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And we're creating kind of these artificial ways of limiting each other's ability to participate, be it the core devs and their refusal to allow anybody to participate that isn't making active PRs, or whether it's, the NOTS users, and we're like, oh, like, if you've made a scam before, we don't want to hear from your voice. Like, for example, the CTV activation. So much of the commentary around CTV's activation wasn't on the activation methodology, which is where I feel it should have been. They attempted a speedy trial, Jeremy Rubin did. And instead it was on the personal shitcoinery bullshit that Jeremy is interested in. It wasn't based on the code, it was based on personalities. And I think that's because for most users, it is a more accessible thing to participate in and to comment on is the stupid shit people are individually and personally doing versus the technical side of the debate. But that's not where our focus should be. It should be on the technicals.
I think that's, if I remember correctly, I might be wrong here, I think Jameson Lobb also brought that argument up in my episode with him, that that's it's very
ironic coming from Jameson Lobb, considering he is one of those people that sends a lot of that shade to Luke. It's not about Knots, it's about Luke. And I think that you see that actually from a lot, like, everybody's human. It's what humans do, but like, it's worth calling out when it happens. Like, a lot of these people can make a very good argument and then immediately contradict themselves with an adjacent argument. Another example is Peter Todd. Peter Todd made some really good arguments about full RBF. He's like, it only takes 5% of nodes or less to propagate a transaction that everybody filters. You can double spend. The mempool isn't a hard state. We should just adopt full RBF. And he was right. And then the next second, he's like, oh, you're censoring me with your filters. You're censoring me. I can't propagate my transactions. It's like, well, which is it? Can any transaction propagate either through side channels or less than 5% of the gossip network? Or is it that filters work and are censoring transactions, Peter? You got to tell me. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have it both ways. So it seems very common to me that we make arguments both from, very competent developers in the ecosystem and from the average user from a state of ideology. It's more about what we want personally than it is about the technical reality.
Interesting. I think also I remember he mentioned that he sees Knots as a distraction from more important issues around developing Bitcoin. I think he brought up governance and CTV. I think that's what he brought up.
Which is interesting because the Knots camp is like actually pretty gung-ho about things like CTV and, CSFS. In fact, I just attended a little workshop that they were doing over there on the subject. They've got code in one of their branches for experimenting with CTV and CSFS. So I don't I don't accept that argument from Lop that it's a distraction. I think it is pretty clearly a distraction in the scope of the issues that we've been talking about and the kind of things that have gone on in core consensus issues like lot true, how forks are activated, the governance model of the reference implementation. Op return is such a nothing burger. I can definitely understand why people would say, "Oh, this is nothing." Like, why are we even talking about this? This is a distraction. And I think that's also informed by how, for the entirety of Bitcoin's history, core contributors have just been able to say, well, if you don't like something we're saying, if you disagree with our engineering, go run another client. Well, for the first time, we actually are. And I think that it's like kind of exploded in their face a little bit, backfired. And they're still on the same note. They haven't quite figured out how to change that message yet. Instead, they're just driving people away with their, typical engineering antisocial behavior.
I talked about that with Daniel White. He brought that up, that like more social skills sometimes would be better. But it's a whole another thing. One thing I'm also interested in is how this whole debate will kind of end up. Do you foresee that we have maybe just like a dual or maybe even 3 implementations that like most people are running, or do you think like either side will win out, and also to the sense that run your own implementation, all of a sudden people actually doing that is like core kind of afraid that they're kind of getting irrelevant if more and more people just like if nobody runs the implementation?
God, I hope so. So to the ends justify the means, people. I assume that's the ends. I assume that the goal here is to get more people running different implementations, regardless of whether they make those choices based on misinformation, because it's good for the health of the network. A lot of the issues that I have problems with, for example, pushing consensus decisions, quite simply become impossible when core does not have a supermajority of the nodes on the network. They just don't have that ability to push things in a manner that they're going to deem state safe anymore without collaborating with other parties. And that to me is a beautiful, beautiful thing. There already are a lot more than 3 node implementations of varying competency and quality. I've mentioned 3 here just now, like Core Knots BTCD. There's also what's the one Libre that is Peter Todd's. It's just spams everything. Bcoin, GoCoin. There's a bunch. Would I like to see more of them adopted? Yeah, I really absolutely would. That would be fantastic in my opinion. I'm worried a little bit about having a population of node runners that are so easily manipulated, but generally speaking, I'm very happy that more people are running knots.
Could it be in the future that node implementation is almost like, and hear me out on that wild comparison, is almost like a political party where, for example, in Europe, it's normal to have like 3, 4, 5 popular political parties, where usually 2 or 3 are pretty big, and there's like 3, 4. The third and the fourth one is a little bit smaller. Is that a future where this could end up being the Bitcoin ecosystem for node running?
It's a very possible future. And I mean, I think it goes back to what I was talking before about people are tribal by nature. They're going to pick a tribe. They're going to pick Coke versus Pepsi. They're going to pick Mac versus Windows versus Linux. And once they're in a camp, a lot of people find it difficult to extract themselves from that camp. It almost becomes like an extension of their person that they like Coca-Cola, and I think that we're going to see that same kind of tribal thing and are seeing that same kind of tribal politic play out in these node camps. And I expect that to continue and further mature. And I don't necessarily think that's good. I think that a lot of the motivations for that tribal behavior aren't grounded in verification. They're grounded in ideology. And that could be dangerous for us down the road. I'm worried about that.
Because a lot of people also bring it up, and feel free to dodge that question if you don't want to go there, because it's pure speculation. What do you think Satoshi would run, and where Satoshi on this argument would be, because a lot of people I see like, listen to what Satoshi said in the white paper, and I think he would run this. And I don't like that idea because it also is used usually from Bitcoin Cash people, these arguments.
Yeah, I think the idea of appealing to Satoshi is, I don't know how else to put this. Sorry, it's incredibly stupid. I think that appealing to any authority figure about what you should do with your node is incredibly stupid. I don't care what Satoshi's thoughts were. Have you read, some of that early Bitcoin code, Satoshi's code? He was not a competent developer by anything that you like. He wasn't a professional developer the way you or I would define a professional developer. He's got the stink of academia on his code. It looks like he's in R or MATLAB, when like it's magic numbers everywhere, spaghetti as long as you can twirl your fork. It's a mess of tightly coupled nonsense when you're looking at his code. And he made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes both in the white paper and his assumptions about, for example, SPV proofs or purely statements of fact, like the longest chain is the most valid one. The longest chain isn't the most valid one. The most accumulative proof of work chain is the valid one. So like the descriptions in the white paper don't even match the code, and his expectations of the future were wrong. He was unilaterally deploying forks, just as, willy-nilly, everybody run this new version. This is new, and we're gonna fork. He was a benevolent dictator doing his best, but he wasn't some genius. He wasn't some, master authority that we should be bowing to. I really have no respect at all for people that are like, oh, what would Satoshi do? It's like, why should I care? What are you talking about? No, let's talk about the code and its merit.
Bitcoin is, and we like, there's this two sides of it. Like the first side is like, being grateful that Bitcoin is here. And being grateful that someone like put this in the world, that Satoshi Nakamoto put this in the world, but also at the same time, like Bitcoin is so much bigger than Satoshi Nakamoto. So like it is first of all like very good that like he never came out and like he never claimed ownership, and we don't know who or he or she or they are. I think that's amazing, and I hope it will never happen. But even if it happens, like who cares? Like Bitcoin is so much bigger than this one person or group or like whatever.
That's exactly right. Like Bitcoin is me. Bitcoin is my node. As far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin's the code that I run. And if other people disagree with that, that's fine. As far as I'm concerned, they're not running Bitcoin. I'm glad you mentioned Bcash, because and I'm sorry to my friends in the Knots community. I've spent a lot of this podcast, explaining problems I have with the Knots community. But one of them is that what they're doing in terms of argument deeply resembles the Bcash community. Arguments from ignorance, arguments that are emotionally charged. Obviously, there's nothing to fork about here. We're not talking about a network split. We're not talking about anything like that. But I have a huge problem with the debate, and I think what happened with Bcash is a good example of how that kind of misinformation can be leveraged to the significant harm of the user base dumb enough to follow it. I don't want to be Bcash. I'm not interested in having a shitcoin that, nobody can run a node on or anything like that. And to the Knots camp credit, they'd say, well, then don't allow spam, like reduce node resources. But that's just not realistic. There's always going to be spam, just like there's always going to be scammers. There always have been. I feel like a lot of people are just suddenly, this is maybe their first cycle, and this is their first time being exposed to some of these issues. Like they weren't around when Counterparty was being created. They weren't around for the dawn of shitcoins. They didn't see all of this being done on Bitcoin in layers so many times already, and they haven't seen it being done elsewhere. So they're very worked up, and they're like, oh my goodness, is this the death of Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin going to die if we run Core v30? And I'm like, no, please, for the love of God, stop saying that. You make me embarrassed to be associated with you. I don't want to be a Bcasher.
I love this episode so much because it's a very fresh perspective to this whole issue, at least for me. And I will send this around to everyone saying, oh, what do you think about this whole situation? Because I think you bring a very fresh and clear opinion in there and perspective in there that isn't just like purely on one side. And yeah, like of course, like you run knots and you go in this arguments why you run knots, but you are not using emotional arguments, and you're actually arguing, as you just said, a lot also against knots, which I think is very refreshing for me to see. Is there anything that I forgot to ask about that issue? Is there anything that you would like to add on like core versus knots?
So like I would like to spend a little time shitting on core a little bit. I feel like balance skills as I have here. So one of the big problems that I have with core beyond those general issues that I've already described in their governance. So for example, you know the letter that SEPA released regarding this op return issue? And, you know, it was like public. So like he's been kind of going around, and he recently made another post regarding that on the Stack Overflow. And it's as far as I'm concerned, a lot of what is discussed in these letters is misinformed or only partially informed for the convenience of those that have signed it. And it's just factually incorrect statements. Like, for example, I'm sorry, but you can't predict what's going to be in the next block. I know you want to. I know that would make life so much easier for everybody. But because mempools are arbitrary, you can't. I know that creates security implications for layers. Tough titties. There's security implications for layers. This is just the reality. You don't get to have a unified mempool. And frankly, if we did, like, would we even need a blockchain? Blockchain is where we unify our state. Mempool is a personal resource for queuing transactions, potentially making fee estimations, and otherwise exploring pending Bitcoin transactions that are about to occur. There's always going to be things like OFAC regulations saying miners can't mine something. You're not going to predict whether those transactions are going to enter a block unless your node is also applying OFAC regulations or each regional regulation. Are we going to create a part of our mempools code that checks against the OFAC regulation list and every other regional restriction for whether transactions are going to get in a block? And even then, you don't know who's going to mine it. So restrictions in one area aren't going to be the same as restrictions in another. You're never going to find a perfectly accurate, everybody shares the same mempool understanding of what the next block is. There's also always going to be private mempools. There's always going to be accelerators. There's always going to be out-of-band transactions. And the way that the core group presents out-of-band transactions as something that are bad and something to avoid is so wrong. They are an important part of our decentralized and censorship-resistant properties. I know that it doesn't matter if everybody filters my transactions. I've got a non-standard transaction. I want to push it to the blockchain. I know I can just contact a miner. I can send that transaction to a miner and nobody can censor me. So long as there is any miner in the world who's willing to mine it, I might have to wait a while, but I can get it into the blockchain. This isn't a problem, it's a solution. So often developers, be they in the core camp or any other camp, treat Bitcoin's decentralized properties as a problem. And it's not. It is a solution that has certain negative side effects from a purely engineering perspective, like the unscalability of the blockchain. Blockchains just don't scale. Nothing append only can scale. This is just basic computer science. You can't infinitely append to something and expect everybody's got to verify it from the origin point and that it's going to scale. This is why we need to build in layers. This is why we need things like, in my opinion, CTV. We need to have non-interactive channel factories, things like that. Anyways, they also make claims about, block reconstruction times that are just false. I'm sorry, SEPA, it's false. And I resent someone who knows as much as you presenting the fact that block reconstruction times are increasing as evidence of miner centralization or of block propagation problems, because that is simply not true. Compact block relay chooses the top 3 peers that you are relaying with and designates them high bandwidth peers. Those high bandwidth peers, the only 3 that you pick, and we should also mention you only actually relay 3 times unilaterally unless asked. Those 3 that you're relaying to, you do it before you do any block reconstruction. So before you even begin attempting to reconstruct the block, all you do is check the proof of work for its validity, and then you're relaying that block. There is no detriment to not having those transactions in the mempool that are in the block, except for the individual node runner. Running a node is about you, the individual, not the network as a whole. And presenting it as some kind of like attack on the network the way that some developers are is completely disingenuous. Block reconstruction is something of a red herring in this regard. Yes, you have to wait for block reconstruction for other than those 3 high bandwidth relay peers. But those are just for people that are asking for the blocks afterwards. That's not you relaying them. That's people being like, hey, do you have this block knocking on your door? And you're like, wait a second, I'm still reconstructing it. I've already relayed it to 3 people, but like, because you're asking, I'll give it to you. Just give me a second to verify all of it first. And they're like, well, what about miners? The miners need to have all the stuff before they can even build on the next block. And it's like, yeah, and miners know that. And they've, as a result, positioned themselves in the network topology in such a way that they know they're going to get those transactions. They're setting their mempool settings to be incredibly broad so that they know they're going to get that transaction. So again, let's look at sub 1 sat per vbyte transactions, which are blocked by everybody. Nobody's relaying them. And yet all the miners have them. So the argument here that block reconstruction times cause miner centralization or delay block propagation is just false. And trying to use that to manipulate people is not appropriate. And then back to the whole point of like, we can't even discuss the motivations for this in your letter, SEPA, and everybody that signed this. Like we can't even discuss the fact that the only reason you're doing this is a shitcoin company's blackmailing you, saying if you don't do this, we're going to spam the chain, and then they do anyways. Like, come on. No, I have a huge problem with the narrative coming out of core. And then if you say any of these things to them, as I've spoken to many core contributors, Greg Maxwell, Ava Chow, SEPA, and others, about this, and like the response is, by the end of it, well, go run something else. Well, I am. And as an educator, I'm also making sure other people run something else. Like, you're digging your own grave. You want to talk about foot guns? Compared to the foot gun of possibly having poor fee estimation, which, by the way, like, at least in my experience, I haven't been able to find any difference between core and NOT's fee estimation running both. But I at least acknowledge, like, that's a possibility. If you got different things in your mempool and you're using your mempool to estimate fees, it's possible that you're going to get different fee estimation. But I haven't noticed any tangible difference at all, and I've been tracking it for a while. Saying that these are like some disastrous problems is so dishonest. It's as dishonest as the NOT's camp's arguments. So from my perspective, both of these sides are slinging bullshit. One is more technically nuanced bullshit than the other, and the other is more emotionally charged bullshit. But it's all bullshit, and I have a very serious problem with the fact that this is the state of our discourse.
It's so great because it all comes down to it's more nuanced than it looks, and the emotional charged arguments are mostly completely emotionally charged and not with technical how should I say it? There are no technical backgrounds to that. Really cool. I mean, it's the time flew by. We're already on the end side of this podcast. But I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests that are coming new on the podcast. And the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I think that one of the most broadly applicable skills that you learn in Bitcoin is how to verify. And this should extend far beyond Bitcoin itself. It should extend throughout your life. So much of what we endure as our respective societies is built on misinformation, especially political misinformation. We don't get taught critical thinking. We don't get taught logic in our public schools. We get a very poor view of history. And as a result, we keep making the same mistakes and we keep failing to verify. I think that one thing that I can teach you, or rather the communities that I've built can teach you, is how to critically think about some of the things that these people are saying. Like when core dev says something, I want people to seriously think about it and say, like, well, is that true? I didn't know if block reconstruction times actually caused a problem until I went and tested it and looked at the code. And then I was like, no, wait a second. We're relaying these transactions before they're reconstructed. So this is a lie. And until you're willing to go and verify these things, you are going to be at the whims of whoever's got the loudest voice and the most emotionally charged voice. And I think that that's very dangerous, not only in Bitcoin, but in your broader life. I want people to be more keen to verify. I think you're muted there, Robin.
Gosh, sorry. I think that's a very sensible approach of saying verify, don't trust. I mean, I just put it out there because I think there's some small limit to that, where it probably, like as you said in the beginning, you don't have to verify all the code that you're running all the time, but verify the things that are important to you. Verify money, verify critical things that you're running, and also beyond, as you just said, beyond Bitcoin, beyond code, verify the things in your life that are very important to you, because there are some aspect that are also debated sometimes on the podcast, where if you start critical, like if you start questioning everything, it's a good thing, but you have to also trust in some things, because you can fastly turn up to be someone paranoid in the woods, not trusting anyone, because in our daily lives we have to trust in a lot of things that you kind of rely on. Like this whole debate on freedom. If you don't trust in anyone, you also don't have any freedom, because you then are just living in the woods and don't have any services. Like I trust, for example, that my internet service provider brings me some internet and doesn't break off and stuff like that. But having like using your own modems and using your own devices in your home to get that internet and really filter out, so all your data is not with the internet service provider, that might be a good thing. So there's like many of those different arguments, but I just like to put that perspective out there that trusting is a good thing, but in some instances it makes more sense, and in most instances it makes more sense to actually go ahead and verify.
It really depends on the cost of verification, in my opinion. When verification has a very low cost, there's not a reason not to do it. You know, say somebody in the bar you're sitting beside says something that you're not quite sure is true, and it's a Google away to determine its accuracy. Why wouldn't you? A lot of other things like are very hard to verify. Trusting is good. I agree with you. And it's an optimization. Verifying everything is a level of work that's impossible. Basically, there are some things, first of all, you simply cannot verify because either they're subjective or you don't have the requisite information with which you could verify it. And there's other things that it doesn't matter if you verify them. You have to decide what's important to you as an individual, and that's what you have to verify. And I really hope, to your listeners, money is one of them. Please verify your money. But take those skills then and find the other things that are important in your life and verify those too.
Awesome. 100% agreed. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, what is the one question you would like to get asked, but nobody ever asked you? And what would be the answer to that?
What is the one question I'd like to be asked? And no one's ever asked me. Would you like me to do all your programming for you is the question I'd like to be asked. And the answer is yes, I really would. I've become incredibly lazy in my Bitcoin old age. I have so many ideas and projects that I want to build, so many Bitcoin businesses, and it's not that they're unattainable, it's that I'm a lazy asshole, and it's easier for me to do things like educate and manage these communities, and I really need to do a lot more programming. So if somebody wants to like just ask me if they want to take all that off my plate, yeah, please do.
If someone asks them to like, can I take work off your plate? Like, of course, let's go ahead. Thank you so much, Noam, for being on the podcast. Before I let you go, I think you already mentioned the Discord, but where can basically people find you and your communities?
Yeah, so you can find me and my communities at bitcoindiscord.com. We also run btcmaxies.com, and you can find links to communities there. And I also run Bitcoin CA with my buddy Bitcoin all caps /Fiat. He helps run the Discord too. We're tight, and we often get mistaken for each other, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, man, for being on, and also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.